Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek Russian T34 85. Since the last video, a lot of progress has been made to the vehicle's mechanical and electrical systems. The smoke system, for instance, has been assembled, mounted, and tested on this model. The speaker system have been wired up, as well as mounted to their own custom harnesses, which need to have been fabricated. Some of the other electrical systems have been reconfigured in order to get the model up to the condition that we see it here, so stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of info coming right at you. Starting with the speakers that are supplied with the Armortek kits are contained in this box here, and this is the original packaging that they come in. For the last decade or so, Armortek have been supplying this make and model of speakers with their sound option packs, and for some really good reasons. They're really easy to hook up, and they output a really good quality of sound. The speakers themselves are just an off-the-shelf system that are supplied with the Armortek kits and are actually from the UK-based company Tannoy. I have their website listed below in case anyone who's home brewing their own RC model are interested in picking up a set of speakers. Now, like I said before, here we have the original packaging, and this is how they're always packaged up on these Armortek kits. Opening it up, you can see the contents of the package. Note that speakers are sealed up very well and are very well insulated. Here we have some hardware, namely little rubber suction cups that go on the bottom to keep the speakers from moving around on your tabletop. Two of these black fasteners that we have here, as well as two speaker mounts. Now, generally, these are something that I may or may not use. It just depends on the build and exactly how I'm mounting them to the model. But it's just something that comes with the speaker regardless. Taking off the foam section here, which, by the way, is a side note. This is actually really handy if you build a lot of 1/16 scale models, because you can take the tracks off and rest the model on this portion here, and the hull usually just straddles the styrofoam and prevents the lower suspension getting dirty during the construction. But that's a quick tip for another project. Setting this aside, here we have the speakers right here. They're individually packed in their styrofoam, or I should say, yeah, they have a little cloth, little baggie, as well as a plastic cover to keep them sealed even further. Bags are sealed. And then protecting them further is this nice little felt little sack. And here we have the speaker removed from its packaging. Here's how you hook them up. You just have a black and a red lead. These are just thumb screws, and they do not unscrew all the way. You just loosen them up till they bottom out here on the top. There is a small hole here on the inside portion that's drilled out, and the way it works is you take your wire that's been stripped and tinned, you slide it into this portion here, and then you just tighten it down with this thumb screw until it goes over the wire, keeping it nice and stiff in place, and you just do the same thing to the opposite one and you're good to go. So picking up where we last left off, in the previous video I went ahead and secured the battery as well as the main CPU power board to the vehicle, and this was done via mounts that I made that strap onto the sponsons, and it holds the unit in place. Although this worked extremely well and kept everything in place, one problem with this is that I need extra space on the inside here for the remainder of the equipment, namely the smoke system as well as the speakers. After playing around with some of the components, I was able to get one of the units to fit in the front, and this unit here I envision putting it right here in the back, right behind the two motors. In order to do this, however, I have to slightly modify the equipment bracket that I fabricated before in the previous video, because with the last configuration I wasn't going to be able to fit the speakers in this format. To adapt the unit to make it fit in, I'm keeping the exact same bracket that I fabricated before. There's nothing wrong with the system, and it works very well. However, rather than having the unit butt up directly against the aluminum piece here, I'm going to have it stand off from it, moving the unit forward about an inch or so, which will then free up the necessary space to make room for the speaker. The way I did that is with this little spacer here that I fabricated. Another unit was already fabricated and it has already been fitted to the piece, which I'll show momentarily. But here goes the other spacer that is still waiting to be mounted. The piece itself is fabricated out of a section of aluminum. It was turned on the lathe, and I also went ahead and drilled and tapped this unit so that this bolts firmly to the aluminum on one side, and then the PC board here fastens directly to it on the opposite side. This here will give me the standoff required, but it also has a lot of strength to it and should keep the piece fully supported from henceforth. Another side effect I encountered by moving the control system forward involves the length of the wires that connect to the motors. You'll notice that they are a bit on the tight side, which is something that is less than ideal and is something that you want to avoid at all costs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply replace these wires altogether with new ones or new cable lengths that I fabricated. Now, yes, you can theoretically just cut the wires and add new connectors to it. However, this is something that I really don't like to do because when you have a spliced wire, this is something that can potentially lead to issues down the road, specifically as the model ages. You know, the wires can get corroded or the leads can get corroded and cause some problems. So, and on top of that, it also looks a little bit messier compared to just having a freshly made wire that is the proper length. And here you can see the cables that were fabricated. Note the gauge of the wire. It's this nice thick gauge, and this is the exact same gauge that I utilize on the battery terminals, as well as the battery shutoff switch that I mentioned in the last video. These wires here are going to be more than capable of dealing with the loads and stress that the motors are going to be exhibiting when the vehicle's in operation. The connectors themselves are the exact same patterns as the ones found on the Armortek, so they're just going to be a direct drop-in replacement for the stock units. Over here, you can see I went ahead and needed to manufacture new wire ties because the original ones obviously need to have been destroyed in order to do the wire swap. These are just fabricated out of just two simple strips of zip ties that were just connected together, and then they'll just loop together to form the strap. This has to be done for these type of motors specifically because of the circumference on them. The standard zip tie is just not going to be able to go all the way around. Well, in addition to the speakers, another addition I'm going to be making at this point is the smoke system. The smoke system is the kit supplied unit, and that's all self-contained in this parts bag that we have here. We just dump it out and briefly go over it. Now, for anyone who's ever watched my other Armortek build videos, the smoke system here is going to be pretty familiar because it's the same unit that Armortek has been using on their tanks now for the last number of years. Actually, probably about a decade at this point. So the system basically is tried and true. However, I'll go over that in more depth after I go over some of these parts that we have here. Well, let's just dig in, shall we? First thing that we'll have here are these two lengths of PVC tubes, or I believe these are PEX tubes. Don't know offhand. Anyway, the Armortek kit does supply you with some lengths of tubing just to get you off the ground. It's really up to you if you want to use them or not. Generally, these tubes in the past, they are completely straight. These ones here, you notice, are curved. More than likely, this is due to them being in this bag here for far too many years. So, not sure if I'm going to use these or not. We'll see as the build progresses. Along with the tubes, the kit also supplies you with several lengths of fittings. These are just standard copper plumbing fittings, and you have a T as well as a few versions of elbows. Again, they do come in handy when you get the unit fully assembled. Well, with that out of the way, now we have some other components that are really more or less Armortek specific. In this bag over here, we have the lid of the smoke system. It has this tower built into it where the fan or the blower will mount, and it's also where you can top off the system. Right over here we have the main tub. This is where the filament is held along with the wick and the fluid. And basically once it boils, it gets hot, the fluid boils off, making the smoke, and it vents out through one of these 2 or 3 ports. These two units here are fabricated out of CNC aluminum and are quite, again, typical for these Armortek kits. This over here is a CNC'd section of polymer, and this is actually what holds on the blower motor and secures it to the smoke system tower. It's made out of this black plastic or nylon material, and I believe I've even seen it made in white material in some other renditions of these units, but this is generally what you'll see. This here we have a mounting bracket. It's just a piece of steel that's been laser cut and drilled out. Pretty simple. a length of flexible tubing. This is to refill the smoke system. We also have here some more sections of turned CNC'd brass fittings. These are made specifically by Armortek for their smoke system. As for what they are, I'm going to be going over more of that after the unit is fully assembled, so stay tuned for that. We have a CNC'd nylon fitting. This is to mount the filament on the inside portion of the housing. This one here looks to be a little bit more improved compared to the older units that I've worked on, where they're just a complete circular section. On this one here, they machined 2 flats on it, probably so that you could thread it on with a wrench, or maybe also gives a lower profile. But again, remains to be seen after the unit is assembled. This black matte material here is the wick, and this is, of course, what gets soaked with the smoke fluid in order to give you the smoke that is emitted from the system. Got a bag here full of fasteners. And this bag over here is the heart of the system. We have all pre-wired together the electric blower and the heating element. There is also this transformer, as well as a main shut-off kill switch found all integrally patched into the wiring. And finally, we have this little bag here of these 2 CNC'd aluminum lugs. This, I believe, is specific for the T34, as I haven't seen this set on the other smoke systems that I've built from them. So it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out as the whole unit gets assembled. Well, here we have the smoke system now into its assembly phase. Now, I went ahead and omitted a few steps of the assembly from this video because this is basically redundant information, and I've pretty much discussed this in ad nauseum in previous videos on other Armortek projects. If anyone's curious, check out one of those and you'll be able to see exactly in more depth how I get to this point here. But basically, the metal components, namely the steel bottom plate and the 2 aluminum sections, have been thoroughly primed, and the housing for the filament has also been secured at this point. When it comes to secure this, one thing I do want to point out, because it's very important, make sure that the brass fitting is attached to the nylon before you go ahead and install this to the base. The reason why I say this is because once the nylon is secured to the aluminum housing here, you're not going to be able to thread the brass component in place. So this needs to be one subassembly prior to the main installation. The wick has also been mounted at this point, and I also went ahead and soaked it with the smoke fluid. The smoke fluid that I use is actually the stuff that comes with the Tegan and Henlong models. One side effect of building so many of those models, I do have quite a supply of that material on hand, so it just gets squirted into place, and once it's soaked, the piece now is primed and I could now seal it up. On the top portion here, the only other thing I want to mention is on the little inlet here. Due to the way this thing is machined, there's a small little burr that comes about like a quarter of an inch, or not really a quarter, more like an eighth of an inch down into this little channel over here, and this can restrict some of the airflow that needs to go into the unit. So what I did was, with a Dremel with a small high-speed removal bit, I just went ahead and deburred it, allowing the gap to be bigger, which will allow more airflow to flow into this chamber. Well, with that out of the way, it's now time for me to secure the top plate to the chamber. And this is where I like to use silicone for this procedure. The silicone acts as a gasket and will seal this inner chamber off, allowing the maximum amount of airflow to enter in and exit with all of the smoke that it can possibly output. If you just go ahead and mount this to the component dry like this, you're going to have the risk of not being able to seal off the side portions here, which may lead to some air seepage as well as some smoke seepage out from the sides. If this happens, the inside of your model will fill up with smoke as opposed to the smoke being jettisoned out through the exhaust. One final benefit that this procedure has is that this focuses all the airflow that goes into this chamber to emerge out of the chamber carrying the smoke. And this will have the effect of giving your smoke system just a little bit more power in order to propel the smoke out of your exhaust. For the silicone itself, I'm just utilizing a can here of just Ace brand silicone. One thing I do want to point out is that when it comes to buying silicone, avoid the GE stuff, the General Electric brand. It's actually pretty crappy. I've had lots of experience, and as well as I've even seen other people with the same experience where the stuff just doesn't dry. It just stays goopy for basically forever. So save your money. Don't buy the expensive brand. In fact, the cheapest stuff here actually works the best from what I've seen. In about 15 to 30 minutes, your silicone's all set. That out of the way, I'm just going to go ahead and apply a bead of silicone here. It's a nice even bead is what you're looking for. And then I'm just going to take the top plate. The top plate only goes on in one direction, so you just want to make sure that the holes line up. And then just pop the unit directly in place. From here, I'm going to go ahead and mount on the kit supply fasteners. And one nice thing about this system is that the bottom base here is tapped, so there's no fumbling with external fasteners to worry about. You just take the cap screws and you just thread them into those 4 locations, and you're all set. Now, one thing I am going to do different on this build than I've done on previous Armortek builds that I've done involves the opening here of the airflow slot. On this piece here, this is where the PC fan would connect to, and the air would blow into the chamber and out, carrying the smoke. Well, you'll see that on the stock Armortek unit, there are these 3 holes that are drilled into this piece of polymer over here. This does offer some good airflow. However, just one thing I want to play around with this one is what happens if I just remove these 2 little bridges here, opening up the slot even more. Hopefully, with doing this little technique, I might be able to squeeze a little bit more airflow out of the unit. In order to do this, I have the unit mounted in my mill here, and I'm just going to go ahead and remove the little bit of material found on these 2 sections. And with this material now removed, I could go ahead and mount this to the smoke unit. Well, once the block is mounted on, it's then time to secure on the fan. Like I stated before, the fan and the remainder of the electronics are all interconnected by Armortek and are ready for installation out of the box. Kind of looks like a mess right here, but it's actually pretty straightforward. The fan simply just secures right to the side here with the kit supply bolts. The heating filament gets mounted inside that tube that I mentioned before. The kill switch is then up to you to mount it wherever you deem fit on the model. These 2, well, I should say this main plug here is the power for the entire system, but what's interesting are these other 2 connections right over here, and these patch into one of the motor leads that go from the motor to the main motherboard. With this setup, you can, when the tank is driven and throttle is given to the motor, the fan will power on. Well, after the smoke system is fully assembled, at this point here it's ready for installation. For the installation on this one, I'm going to be utilizing the column method, where I go ahead and I take a billet of aluminum stock, I take it on the lathe, drill out the 2 sections, and tap them. This unit here has already been pre-installed, and by the way, if you'll notice before, I had the fastener pre-fitted to this plate prior to the stem for the filament being inserted, because as you can see, once the filament stem is mounted on, you're not going to be able to install the fastener in that location, so you want to do that before the assembly. Anyway, with this setup here, I could go ahead and fasten it to it with the bolt, and then have 2 corresponding fasteners that will meet it up from the bottom of the hull, securing to the tank in this format. And after a little bit of scratching my head, this is the system I was able to come up with to mount the front speaker to the vehicle. The front speaker itself is not going to make any contact with the floor whatsoever outside of a shock absorber, which I'm going to mention and touch upon in a little bit. But you can see the unit, how it affects. This large strap over here is going to be fastened to each of the sponsons on the tank. There we have this strut that descends downward, and then it connects to the speaker via this L bracket that I have here. On the back, you'll notice I have the wires already pre-installed. I gave myself plenty of length so that I'm not going to run into any surprises where the wire is going to be too short when it comes time for actually plugging everything together. It's a pretty simple assembly, as strange as it may look, but it actually does the job pretty well. And here you can see the speaker now mounted in place. Note the way the speaker secures to the vehicle via the fasteners that hold together the sponsons. This is a common technique that I like to utilize on these Armortek builds. It's a very convenient way to secure things to the vehicle. A lot of individuals like to drill holes into the bottom plate and then secure them that way. That is doable, but however, it does have a few shortcomings, I find. First, the fasteners can be a bit unsightly, specifically if you super detail the lower hull. Now, that's not really the case on this one, but another issue when it comes time to securing things to the lower hull is physically getting to the fasteners on the bottom of the hull in order to mount the units to them. These tanks get heavy very quick, and trying to maneuver something this big and heavy with just trying to fumble around with the fasteners is a bit tiresome at times. So rather than doing that approach, I just went ahead and fastened it to the sponson fasteners, which are already there, pre-drilled and tapped, and are just waiting for something to adapt to it. One thing that it's not really easy to show here on camera, but something that I touched upon earlier is with the way the unit is secured, it is secured via one point, and it's kind of just dangling here. And because of that, the potential for the unit to bounce like this when the vehicle is running around is something that can be a concern to me. So one thing that I did to alleviate this was I took a square of styrofoam, I cut it to size, and I secured it to the bottom plate of the hull via silicone. This keeps everything wedged in place and will prevent the unit from bouncing around. Another benefit of the styrofoam is that because it is a soft, spongy type material, it does act as a bit of a shock absorber, detonating some of the blows that this unit here may be subject to when the tank is running off-road. Moving to the rear speaker, you can see with this one here, the mounting was a little bit different. I didn't need to fabricate that large connecting section like the one in the front needed. The one in the back is just secured by having two of those L brackets fastened together. And then the unit bolts directly to the remaining fastener found on the suspension housing. The silicone that you see here is only being used as a shock absorber like the styrofoam that I mentioned in the front for the same reasons. With this added, if the unit needs to bounce at all, this here should deaden the blow of the vibrations. At this time, the last thing that needs to be mounted to the vehicle to complete the sound system is the amplifier box. And as you can see, I am quickly running out of free space. However, with the way I've seen how the kit is designed, I should be able to make some kind of a shelf come off of these two fasteners over here, and the unit can possibly mount in that type of format. So that right now is the next hurdle to cross over, and I'll be tackling that momentarily. However, before I do that, this area here is going to need to be cleaned up. But while I have everything here, there's one thing that I could definitely test to see if it's working, and that's the smoke system. Like I may have mentioned before, the smoke system is patched into the RC equipment, so I can actually test it at this time. So I have the radio on. I'm going to now turn on the power to the batteries, and I'm now going to be able to turn on the tank. Green light, which is great. So now the tank is powered on. In a couple seconds I'll be able to have control of it, and I do. Okay, so the smoke system is currently patched into the right-hand track, so when the right-hand track moves, so does the smoke system. Or I should say the smoke system then puffs away. The smoke system, by the way, is on. Of course, you want to check that before you go ahead and test it out, or else you're going to be thinking there's something wrong with it, when in actuality it's just powered off. And in no time, you're going to start seeing smoke coming out of the smoke system. By the way, this is the smoke that you want to see, and the place you want to see it coming out of. Otherwise, this might be cause for panic, but rest assured, this is exactly what you want. Right now, the fan is not moving because I'm not giving throttle to the track, but as soon as I give power to the track, there you go. Now, obviously, the next thing I'm going to need to do is plumb the unit together to exit from here and to make its way to the exhaust manifold system, but that's going to be something covered in another video. But as you can see, nice healthy smoke is coming out. It's got a good throttle to it, and because the smoke, or I should say the manifold, so close to the smoke system, you should have some pretty decent exhaust smoke jetting out of the exhaust manifold when the model is completed. Alright, but for the time being, I want to save the fluid inside as well as the heating element, so I'll turn that off for the time being, and turn off the tank, the radio, and I'll also kill the battery. After playing around with some of the bits of equipment, trying to figure out exactly how I'm going to mount them, I think I've come up with a pretty good solution on mounting not only the amplifier box, but several other of the remaining RC mechanical systems. I'm going to be fabricating a shelf in this area over here of the vehicle, which should be tall enough to mount everything in place, but clear the motors and the smoke system, but still have enough clearance so that I can mount on the rear engine deck of the vehicle. In order to do that, I'm going to be fabricating out of some plate aluminum like this one over here. As you can see, I was in the process of trimming this unit, getting it to shape. Unfortunately, when doing the job, my cutting disc here on my angle grinder was completely worn out, and sadly this was the only one I had in the shop at this time. So sometime tomorrow I'm going to have to run out to the hardware store and pick up some replacement discs. Which I believe is actually a good thing, because this is a good place to end off on this video. The next video will probably pick up where I'm completing the installation and mounting of this component here and discuss some of the importance of some of the cutouts that are found on this component in order to properly fit the suspension, why that's relevant. Also, in the next video, I'm probably going to have the tank's radio, which will mean I'll be able to actually test the sound system and have it actually functioning for the first time. Not to mention adding the remainder of the RC equipment, like the turbo rotation system. So the vehicle as a whole is starting to fill up on the inside, and which is a good thing, and pretty soon I'm actually going to be on the turret. So that's going to be a milestone I'm eagerly looking forward to. And, well, again, with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek T3485. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being project update videos like this fella over here, or the other smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since the project start, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that are frequently showcased on this channel. Finally, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace out.